Meet Bob Cornuke, a man who spent nearly a quarter of a century searching for the elusive, lost Ark of Noah. He's climbed over a dozen mountains in the Middle East and covered thousands of weary miles by plane, helicopter, horse, jeep, and on foot. He spent hour upon hour in dusty old libraries from Ankara to Tehran, poring over maps, ancient manuscripts, and crumbling old books in his attempt to unlock a mystery as old as recorded history. He scaled scores of high mountains in wind, rain, snow, and ice, searching for the rotting corpse of Noah's Ark. He has examined what the Bible has to say, what history has to say, and what ancient legend whispers in his quest for this venerable icon. Journey with him now across wild and sprawling lands and vast reaches of time as he tries to find hidden clues that will solve the riddle to this hinge in history. It is only then that we might discover the true location of the mountains of Noah.
The former editor of the National Geographic said, if the Ark of Noah is ever found, it will be the greatest archaeological find in history.
I originally got involved in this because I met a man named Jim Irwin, the eighth man to walk on the moon. Of course, that sparked a tremendous interest in me and a tremendous interest in the media and the public in general throughout the world.
Jim Irwin was well known for his exploits as an astronaut in the Apollo program. The eighth man to walk on the moon, he and fellow astronaut Dave Scott rode a lunar rover on the moon's surface as millions watched on TV sets on Earth. They collected rocks and took scientific measurements. Jim had an epiphany while looking at the Earth from the lunar hills. God must exist, he thought. This simply can't be a random cosmic accident. Upon return, he focused both his scientific interest and his lifelong desire to explore on one primary challenge: finding Noah's Ark.
And Jim said, let's go look for Noah's Ark. That was pretty exciting and strange to go look for Noah's Ark, but he said, if we find it, if we bring back timbers from the Ark, it will change history.
The relationship between Irwin and Cornuke was based on mutual respect. Irwin liked the idea of having someone who had crime scene experience along with crime scene investigation team skills as a part of his team. Cornuke, on the other hand, enjoyed the immediate entree that Irwin's man-on-the-moon status provided, opening doors in nations around the world, even those generally inaccessible to expeditions from the West. They both agreed the Ark would provide unique and possibly conclusive evidence that the scriptures were true and reliable.
In the early years when we looked for Noah's Ark, we all ran to Mount Ararat in Turkey because we were told that was the mountain of biblical fame. That was Mount Ararat. If you looked on that mountain, Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, you would find Noah's Ark.
Mount Ararat, known to the local Kurds as Agri Dagh, the Painful Mountain, seems out of place. Impressive by its size and location, the mountain rises above the surrounding plains to more than 17,000 feet. Rather than a peak among others, it's an isolated mammoth with its frozen glaciers often cloaked with mist and clouds. Hundreds of explorers over 2 centuries have searched the mountain. The first Irwin expedition received unprecedented cooperation from the government and military officials. But by 1986, times had changed. Expedition leader Bob Stuplik.
The intense moments in any trip would be the political struggle, because in all the countries that are involved in this, we can even get permits from the particular country, but because of the lack of control on the border areas, it gets pretty tricky and it gets pretty tense.
With political and meteorological challenges, Bob's first trip to Mount Ararat with Jim Irwin was becoming a different adventure. Dick Bright, a team member and pilot with Continental Airlines, was able to rent a single-engine Cessna and took a film crew along with members of the expedition for several passes around the mountain. The footage shot out of both windows of the aircraft provided one of the first low-altitude aerial photography opportunities. Bright flew past all of the areas that had reports of ark sightings, but nothing significant was identified. Although Bright had acquired a permit to take off from a remote village near the mountain, upon landing, the entire research party was arrested by Turkish authorities for not having a landing permit. All agreed that Jim Irwin's high profile had become a liability. Rather than helping the search, it was making every aspect more difficult. It was actually Jim's decision to not join the next expedition. Although deeply committed to the search, he became the encourager rather than the explorer. Over the next 2 years, Cornuke returned to the mountain twice, both times using a Bell Jet Ranger helicopter to fly much closer to the mountain and explore several areas where ark sightings had been reported. They flew near the Shahinam Deer Ice Rim and then covered the Abektu Glacier, but the view from extremely close range revealed nothing. Many other expeditions followed, but with no finds. Satellite photos, reports from airline and military pilots, comments and maps from other expeditions all became a part of the evidence. After reviewing the reports from climbers and flying over the mountain by airplane and helicopters, Bob became convinced that this mountain held no secret hiding place. He reached a controversial conclusion. There are no visible remains of an ark on Mount Ararat.
When I was a police investigator, we tried to gather evidence. We tried to find, of course, the right guy. And if it wasn't the right guy, the pieces just didn't fit. And we're doing the search for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat in Turkey. The pieces just don't fit. They just don't mesh. And it led me to believe we needed to look somewhere else.
So, if no one can find Noah's boat on Mount Ararat, are the scriptures unreliable? Or could it be that Noah's boat is not on Mount Ararat? An unpopular question, but one that former Detective Cornuke was compelled to ask. Searching the scriptures carefully, several elements of the Genesis account raise questions about Ararat. As with all elements from antiquity, there is substantial speculation among historians and archaeologists about exact locations. There are only degrees of probability. They can only be certain about what they have found up until now. Items from biblical history have the same mix of uncertainty. Often, legend becomes fact. On previous expeditions, Bob has encountered this same conflict with tradition while searching for specific biblical locations. Mount Sinai, Paul's shipwreck, and the location of the Ark of the Covenant, among others, have tradition-laden sites that seem to conflict with the scriptural account.
A prime example of tradition in our culture is the Ark of the Covenant being in Egypt. Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie, talked about it being there. So these traditions are very strong and they mold our public opinion. We need to go away from these traditions and follow what the Bible has to say.
Although many still believe that Mount Ararat in Turkey is the final resting place for Noah's Ark, Bob had begun to adjust his approach.
It's a good chance that the Ark has not been found because people have just been looking in the wrong place.
The focus of the search shifted from mountaintops to books and maps, and the specific words in the Bible. Genesis 8 says, "The mountains of Ararat," not Mount Ararat. Every assumption was challenged, and each of the small fragments of information reviewed. At one point, Bob received a phone call from a gentleman half a continent away. His message was simple: "You're looking in the wrong place. Noah's family came from the east."
Well, there's a paradigm of thought that it's in Turkey. And so being outside of Turkey is confusing to a lot of people because that's where it's been popularly held and traditionally held. But if we follow Scripture and we follow ancient history, we should broaden those parameters to include Iran. And more specifically, Iran is probably the most leading candidate if you take everything into consideration, history and the Bible.
Tradition seemed to favor Mount Ararat in Turkey, but the supporting data and Old Testament accounts painted a different picture. A startling verse that describes the movement of Noah's family after they left the ark seems to have escaped attention. Genesis 11:1 says, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they, the clans of Noah's sons, journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there."
The Bible seems to indicate that the descendants of Noah came from the east and came into what is now known as Iraq. Now, to get from the east to Iraq, you got to come out of Iran. You don't come out of Turkey, which is to the north. Secondly, the Bible does not say that Noah's Ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat. It says the mountains of Ararat, plural. And at the time, Ararat was a region. It wasn't one mountain. Thirdly, Ararat was named in 1200 AD by the Armenians as Mount Ararat. It wasn't known as Mount Ararat when the Bible was written. So that mountain isn't necessarily the mountain that the ark came to rest on. In fact, it may have not even existed in Noah's day. It's a volcanic cone. It's not part of a mountain range.
When you go back in history and you try to see how these legends get started and why they become so ensconced in our culture, one of them is Marco Polo. Travels through the area. He's told by the indigenous people Noah's Ark is legend to be up there. He writes it in his journal, and that becomes history.
The area above the Minyas, said Josephus, a first century Jewish historian. Nicholas of Damascus, who was a biographer for Herod the Great about the time of Christ, just before the time of Christ, also seemed to indicate it was in that area. So we do have evidence even outside the Bible that Ararat may have extended further to the east than many scholars now think.
When people talk about the boundaries of Urartu, which is the Assyrian designation, Armenia, a more modern designation, they can't be precise. There's not a boundary that you can draw a line around. It expanded and contracted up to 1,000 miles based on a war, famine, or some kind of a drought. Very mercurial in the boundaries. So we can just say it's just right in that area of Turkey, in that area of Iran, that area maybe of Azerbaijan. It's just right in that area of the world, and we can't be precise, but we're in the area when we're talking about Iran is right where the Bible indicates it should be.
In searching for answers, one name kept surfacing: Ed Davis. An engineer with the Army during World War II, Ed was stationed in Iran, helping to develop supply routes for the Russian army. He was like many others serving in the military during the war, except for one thing. He claimed that he had seen Noah's Ark.
He made the claim that he saw Noah's Ark in 1943 when he was building roads here with the Army Corps of Engineers during World War II, and he was building supply lines into Russia from the Persian Gulf. And he said that he was taken up by the Abbas family and shown the Ark.
After returning to the States following the war, Ed kept his Ark experience to himself, until one day he crossed paths with Dr. Don Shockey, who was an active Ark researcher.
Ed Davis mentioned that he had seen Noah's Ark, which was a surprise to Don, and Don had had some interest in it. And then Don got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I think this guy's onto something, Larry."
Ed Davis, one of the most colorful characters I've ever met. But he said to me, "Bob, I thought I saw beams and it looked like a barge-shaped object." He said, "I really think I saw Noah's Ark." So we took Ed and we gave him 3 lie detector tests and he passed them. I mean, how do you ignore that? We had to go search where he said he saw Noah's Ark.
Although the Ed Davis account was intriguing, many tried to make it a roadmap to Mount Ararat in Turkey. Others had reason to doubt.
He didn't have a clue what mountain name it was, but he knew the general region and he drew an incredible map. Being an engineer, he knew the topography and he knew how to draw a map, and he drew a great map.
Many tried to ignore the discrepancies with a Mount Ararat location. Others simply dismissed Ed's story entirely. But Bob wanted to find a way to visit the site that Ed described. Only then would they know if he had really seen the Ark. The question remained, where did Ed Davis see his object? In early 1997, Bob put a plan into action. He traveled by himself to Iran. He would start in the south and drive north, talking with locals and pursuing any leads that arose. If an Ark existed in these mountains, surely the locals would know about it. Persia, often mentioned in Scripture, is the area now occupied by Iraq and Iran. Around 3500 BC, it was far different. Animal-drawn wheeled carts were used in Samaria. They also used plows to till their land and oars to propel their ships on the Euphrates River. The Sumerians were the most advanced and complex civilization in the world at that time. And by 3100 BC, they had invented a system of writing, cuneiform, which was the first of its kind in the world. It was a land with great wealth, natural resource, and opportunity, and is often described as the cradle of civilization. It soon became the most powerful kingdom of its day. Traveling as an American tourist to Iran, this land of unique history, Bob requested a local Iranian Muslim guide who would translate and provide background information.
I was amazed that my guide Fatima and that our driver Ollie knew about Noah's Ark being in Iran. They have heard about traditions their whole life about the Ark being in Iran. They called it Nuha. And as we traveled through the country, especially in the northern part of Iran, we started hearing of many legends about the Ark being in the mountains of northern Iran.
The cities in the region are filled with history. In many ways, the street markets and local activity seem closer to the ancient ways than the 21st century. In Susa, Bob was surprised to find a strong reference to biblical history. Near the center of town is a church which purportedly holds the remains of Daniel, of notoriety for spending the night in the den of hungry lions. People line up to touch the burial crypt, assuming a special blessing. In Hamadan, the tombs of Esther and Mordecai are a surprising reminder that thousands of Jews still live in Iran, a remnant of the great dispersion of Jews from Babylon. Fatima was an excellent guide, but was almost overwhelmed by Bob's persistence to find local confirmation of a great flood. Each day she would ask the same questions. Did your ancestors tell you any stories about a great flood? Have you ever seen or heard of a large boat in the mountains? By the third day, she was growing tired of the same responses. But on the fourth day, something changed.
But the second one, which he came, he told, yes, I have heard about the Noah boat, which is landed over the mountain in near Kermanshah, on the way to Kermanshah, in Aleshta.
It is not unusual for cultures to have legend of a great flood and a boat with people and animals on board. More than 180 cultures have such stories. However, it is unusual when the locals report that they have seen or know where this boat is located.
He says it's in the legend, they say that all here was water. And Noah has come here with his boat and landed here on the top of this Alvan mountain.
As Bob, his guide, and their driver head toward the mountains in southern Iraq, they ask for more information from every likely and unlikely source. Local guards met them along the way.
I asked him whether that Nuha boat was here. He said yes. And I asked him whether he saw. He said yes, he saw.
Could this be it? After years of searching, could Bob simply walk up this path and find Noah's Ark?
I'm in a part of the world where they had never had an American, they told me. They'd never seen an American, and I'm going up this trail. They're telling me through my guide, you're going to see Noah's Ark at the top of this mountain. My heart was going like a trip hammer.
At the end of the trail, Bob found a large, relatively flat area that resembled a football field. The local guard said, there it is. Bob saw nothing but dirt. he began to explore the site, walking to the edges to see any layers of sediment, rock, or wood.
They just shot 2 shots off and said they're mad. We don't know what they're mad at. We're very high up, and I started walking over to look over this valley. They call this Ship's Head Mountain. They claim that the Ark is here. Became very upset when I started walking over to this area. So, don't know what to do. Probably listen to the shots and I'll walk back and see what they're upset at.
Bob never found any evidence of an ark at that site, but did continue his journey north through the Zagros Mountains. Along the way, Fatima continued to question villagers about the boat of Noah.
When I came back, it was another empty experience. It was hollow. We didn't find anything. And you start questioning yourself. You start questioning the sanity in this. This is probably the most difficult object in the world to ever find. Even the Titanic, they knew exactly where it sunk, and it took them forever to find the thing. Now we're dealing with an area the size of Alaska, and we're not finding anything. So it gets discouraging.
Upon return to the United States, Bob began to search for corroborating information that would help identify any locations in Iran as logical sites for the Ark. All seemed to connect with the question, just where are the mountains of Ararat?
When you start using different lenses over the search for Noah's Ark, you start getting things in focus. You go from the traditional place in Mount Ararat in Turkey, now you start looking at Iran. It becomes more clear. You gain clarity in looking in that area, and that's why we look there, because the historians all pointed there and the Bible all pointed there. So logically, we had to go search there.
A new round of sophisticated satellite imagery was utilized to attempt a match of the Ed Davis story with the real terrain. After months of research, a former military officer proposed a site that he thought matched the verbal description given by Ed Davis. It was a mountain in northern Iran, known as Mount Sabalan.
Sabalan became very appealing because it was this huge mountain, looked very close in size to Mount Ararat in Turkey.
After months of research and planning for a return expedition to northern Iran, the plans took an incredible twist. Bob received a call from pilot friend Dick Bright regarding Mount Ararat in Turkey.
Well, about 2 weeks ago, I received a phone call from a very credible eyewitness, a guy that flies for Continental Airlines as a captain, and he said he saw what appears to be a structure on the mountain, and I was really surprised to hear that. Here he is, probably the best eyewitness in the last 50 years, and he calls me right before we go on an expedition. So it's pretty tempting. I had to go with him to see what this object is, but there's a lot of phantom objects on that mountain. There's a lot of objects that people see that think is Noah's Ark, and when you get out right up to it, it's nothing more than just an old piece of rock that is broken off or some anomaly that can be easily explained. So what we're trying to do is just solve the riddle and the mystery of Mount Ararat.
While the other members of the Sabalan expedition headed to Tehran, Bob Cornuke and Bob Stuplik headed to Turkey and a return to Mount Ararat. This trip was particularly dangerous, since the mountain was the site of recent terrorist and military skirmishes. The climbers had to travel in darkness to avoid becoming a target.
Okay, it's 9:30 at night on our first day of the trip. About ready to go up the mountain. Well, last night at about 9:30, we started a pretty arduous trip. We made about 8,000 feet elevation in about 10 hours. And got here, put our sleeping bags out. It was freezing cold, but the sun came up a couple hours later, warmed us up. We're rested a couple hours. Now we're going to try to go up to the ice cap and see if we can make it to the ice in the next 8 hours or so. It's still a long trip ahead of us.
The mountain is always a challenge. Sometimes it's weather. At other times, it's geopolitics.
This whole area, as of this week, was covered with Kurdish terrorists. The Army's quite concerned. We're concerned. We don't know if they're going to suspect us of being involved with the Kurds, or if there's any kind of a confrontation. I've heard about shootings, people actually being shot up here. So we're just being extra cautious. We don't want to have any problems. We don't want to encounter anything that is unknown to us. So the prudent thing to do is just take our time, stay low, hike at night, and see if we can see the objects that we want without drawing too much attention to ourselves, and possibly even drawing some kind of dilemma that we won't want to be a part of. Bob, in 1982, didn't Jim take a bad fall up there?
There isn't any snow there now, but when Jim fell, that's right where he fell, right in that first bowl. He was partway down that first bowl, he slid and he ended up in rocks. Ripped his clothes, his hands, 4 big gashes in his head, knocked out 4 teeth.
It's amazing he made it. Now, how long was he up there in that condition?
He fell at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We didn't get to him till 8 o'clock the next morning.
Bob Stuplick was the lead climber on that Jim Irwin expedition. He is leading this latest climb to explore the reported sighting.
In the 1950s, a Frenchman by the name of Ferdinand Navarro claimed to have found wood from one of these glaciers. In one of those crevasses down there, he said he actually pulled timbers of the Ark. It's been dated since then and shown to be a little over 1,000 years old, which is way too soon for any wood to be from Noah's Ark, but he made the claim that he found Noah's Ark, and subsequent to that, many explorers have been in this gorge area and have climbed on this glacier. They haven't found any wood. So I think the find itself is highly suspect, and surely not timbers from Noah's Ark.
The group pushed on toward the ice fields, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Ark-like structure reported by airline captain Dick Bright. The weather was cooperating, but altitude and long days were beginning to take their toll.
We've just hiked for about 3 days solid, very little rest, to get to this site of the Ahora Gorge. And we're here primarily to see if any of the eyewitness accounts throughout history have any merit.
The Ahora Gorge has long been the focal point for Ark searchers. The shifting layers of ice continue to expose new rock outcroppings while covering others. Often, the dark rock looks like a structure surrounded by ice.
There's a lot of people that say that Noah's Ark is in this very canyon. It's humongous. It's twice the size of the Grand Canyon. And we're going to do a thorough research of the area and find out if Noah's Ark is actually here, or if it's just another disappointing eyewitness account that's turned out to be false.
Well, this is the Shaheenam Dare, where the ice is about 30 feet thick, and right here in the middle it's about 100 feet thick. And there's actually about 12 square miles of ice cap on this whole thing. You could put a whole mess of ships up here and never find them.
I have no idea what kind of animal this is, but we're pretty high. This is about 60 feet down. There is a sheer drop off that goes about 8,000 feet before you stop falling. But obviously this animal is indigenous to the area. Got too high, old age, we don't know. The Kurds, most of them don't call this mountain Mount Ararat, they call it Agri Dag, which means painful mountain. This is just another example of the painful mountain.
After days of walking across the ice cap, searching the Shaheenam Deer and Ahora Gorge, they found nothing to corroborate Dick Bright's sighting. Not only were they exhausted and nearly out of water, but by satellite phone, they had been alerted to new terrorist and military action on the mountain. Urged to use a different route down, they were forced to move only at night and attempted a rendezvous with their local guide at an unplanned destination.
I guess the most unique man on the team is Bob Stuplick. He has climbed Mount Ararat numerous times. He knows the topography, the terrain better than anyone in the world today.
The best thing about the trip to Turkey this year was the weather. We had absolutely perfect weather, couldn't have asked for anything better. It allowed us to get to 3 different areas that we really wanted to check out.
People say, well, it could be here, could be here, could be here. We went to all those sites.
And to be able to run around on that glacier up at 17,000 feet was a pleasure to do without being in a big storm.
And we went to each specific site objectively as investigative explorers to determine whether these sites are Noah's Ark or not. And we found there's no boat on that mountain at any one of these sites. We went to some areas that are very hard to get to and that people have been trying to get to for years, and we succeeded in getting these areas, but the boat is not there.
If Noah's Ark did land on this painful mountain, Agredag, it has either been crushed by the ice flows, buried beneath the impenetrable frozen wasteland, or gradually disintegrated from time and harsh elements. This latest search, under favorable conditions, only reinforced the conclusion that Noah's Ark is not on Mount Ararat in Turkey. Immediately following the hasty exit from the mountain in Turkey, Bob rejoined his original expedition in Tehran. Gleaning information from his prior journey to Iran and relying upon satellite imagery and maps obtained at home, the small group returned to search for the Ark near the summit of Mount Sabalan. Located between Lake Urmia and the Caspian Sea, aerial photos seem to indicate topography similar to the location Ed Davis described years earlier. The Iranian team had traveled directly to Tehran, while Bob Cornuke and Bob Stuplik headed to Turkey. This group did research in and around Tehran, spending hours with their interpreter and guide, reviewing maps and asking questions. Once reunited in Tehran, the entire group began to formulate a specific plan for their search.
We're here right now in the mountains of Kurdistan. This is where we're sitting right now is the invasion routes of the Assyrians and Babylonians who came into this area on military campaigns thousands of years ago. So they actually wrote about the flood account, and they wrote about what they knew to be Noah's Ark as being in this area right here.
The small expedition headed for the mountain, trying to maintain a low profile while traveling between villages, looking for roads or trails that matched the aerial surveillance. Unfortunately, one of the group members often spoke of being a former pilot while wearing military fatigues. The locals were not only mystified by his comments, they were fearful that these foreigners were spies of some type, and they notified the Iranian military special police.
The police have stopped us. They've detained us. They're holding us right now. They're asking a lot of questions. We don't know what because of the language barrier. But I think it's best right now that we just sit tight, that we let the process go through. We've done nothing wrong, but it apparently is suspicious to them of us driving all around the area here and asking all these questions pertaining to this mountain.
Bob and his group spent the next 6 hours in police custody, waiting for a verdict regarding their release and the ability to further explore the mountain.
They had us arrested. They didn't say why. It was pretty tense for a long time. But they just released us, and I feel pretty good about it. And looks like they're going to let us go back to the mountains. So it's good to be a free man once again, able to roam the countryside. God bless America.
Terry? Yeah, this is Larry Williams calling. Your husband did it again. Well, we got picked up by the secret police.
Resuming their search, the accessible roads or trails did not seem to match the satellite imagery. The only thing that was hopeful was a small village nicknamed by the group as Sulphur City, due to a constant aroma of rotten eggs. Since the Ed Davis account included a location that had a very strong sulfur smell, it provided some support to this mountain site.
Okay, we're just heading up from this small little village, and we're excited. It's a beautiful mountain. We're just going to go today and do a lot of walking, a lot of hiking at very high altitude.
If the Ark exists, somebody, someplace knows. So you can start to narrow it down. Obviously, it's not people in cities, it's people high up in mountain country like this. Today, I think we're 12,000 feet. You're going to have to look for it probably in a very desolate part of the world.
Bad weather cloaked the top of the mountain, and while the rest of the team stayed below, Cornuke and Stuplik went to the summit.
Too cloudy. It was a mess up there. It was like bullets. It was like Antarctica. It was so cold.
My batteries froze. My camera shutter froze open. Couldn't get
up and get the camera to work. Yeah, the one battery in the video froze solid. Wouldn't even work. So I put the other one under my clothes. A couple of minutes it warmed up. And we got some good stuff, but it's like Antarctica up there.
Is it?
It was a total whiteout, clouds. Unbelievably grueling 8 hours.
Really?
Never want to do that again. Ever.
Simply because we didn't find it doesn't mean that it's not there. It simply means we didn't go to the right place.
This second Iranian journey ended with more questions than answers.
Well, after the second trip to Sabalon, we wondered if we'd ever find the old boat, and maybe God didn't want us to find the Ark. It's kind of presumptuous for us to say we'll discover anything. God will reveal it in His time for His purpose and His glory, and we thought maybe He just doesn't want it found.
While pondering the evidence, the scriptures, and prior trips, Bob received one more unexpected piece of information.
We had given up. This search isn't going nowhere. Then I got a phone call from a man named Ed Holroyd, who is professor at the University of Denver, satellite reconnaissance expert, and he said, I have taken it upon myself to take the drawing of Ed Davis, the map that Ed Davis gave, and I overlaid that onto all the potential areas in the Middle East. He said, I found the mountain. I found a dead-on match of where Ed Davis was. And I thought, oh boy, here we go, one more time. Get that backpack ready. We're going to try and find, finally, the Ed Davis site.
Once the maps were examined, Bob couldn't resist attempting one more expedition. Gathering a cross-section of folks, Bob headed back to Iran. Their steps were guided by the new satellite photos and maps.
My last several journeys was not searching for Noah's Ark. It was trying to find the Ed Davis object. We were trying to find what this object was that Ed said he saw. He talked about it being black beams sticking out of the side of this mountain. And that's what we were looking for.
The next day, Bob's team began the final leg of the journey, following the path that seemed to match Ed Davis's trek almost 60 years earlier. After climbing most of the day, they reached a bowl with a severe drop-off that seemed to perfectly match the Davis description.
Bob and I sat on a rock. We were looking across the valley and we were examining the sketch that had been left by Ed Davis. And as we looked at that, we could identify the different rivers, where the glaciers were. The topography looked exactly like Ed Davis's sketch. And we kept looking for in the locations on his sketch where he said the Ark would be, and we just could not identify anything that would even look like an Ark until we looked all the way across the valley and we saw this object. And the object literally looked like the bow of a ship jutting out of just that mountain slope. It was a different color. It was a real oddity. So the next day we decided that would be the area that we would concentrate our search in.
The team returned the next morning to take a closer look at the object.
Coming up on a big rock object that we're told by some eyewitnesses could be Noah's Ark. A man named Ed Davis said he saw it, and it looks like a big rock formation from down below. When you get up close, it has some very interesting configurations and dimensions and colors and textures, which we want to have these samples tested and see if it could be petrified wood.
In 2005, when we were up at the object, it certainly, when you get close to it, it looks like it's a rock outcropping. But when you really start to look at it, it looks like these are hewn wooden beams.
Oh, good. Here. Can you get it? Yeah. Oh, baby. That looks like a piece of wood, guys. It sure does, doesn't it?
Holy Toledo.
Look at that.
Okay, just kind of turn it and...
It's in every particular that looks like it could have just come right off a tree.
It's got a circular grain to it.
Look at the grain on the end.
Look at that. Isn't that amazing?
It looks like the grain, it's like it's split like wood.
I can tell you it's a lot heavier than wood.
Like tree rings.
Bob and his group were not sure they had found Noah's Ark, but were beginning to feel confident that they had indeed found the location and object that Ed Davis had visited.
We're we're trying to solve the Ed Davis mystery. What did he see? Did he see Noah's Ark? Or did he see this rock formation and thought that it was Noah's Ark?
The most difficult part of our search is trying to find out what we're even looking for. People do not know what Noah's Ark looked like. The Bible gives us a very archaic, a very ambiguous description of the ark. Ark means box or chest in Hebrew. It's about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It wouldn't have had a hold outside with a keel going down. Over 300 feet, that would just break up and it would allow leakage, and it wouldn't be a very efficient way to transport the animals. Most translations, people will say, is that the ark has 3 decks. It doesn't say that. It literally means that it had a lower, middle, and an upper. Now, that could be decks. That's an assumptive interpretation, but it could also mean that it just had a lower, middle, and an upper part of a floating platform. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take this model and we look at it this way, and we're going to see that it has cages here that have ventilation. There's no hole. It has a floating platform or a barge at the bottom of these beams. It would be dipped in tar, totally buoyant, watertight, cages built on top of them like you see containers on a big cargo ship. On top of the ark, we would have, instead of beams and heavy big logs to support the top, we don't have any snow, we don't have any heavy loads on top of the ark. We have a covering. When Noah put back the covering on the ark, he used the same term that was used to put back the covering on the tabernacle, which was the portable tent that carried the Ark of the Covenant in the wilderness wanderings. The ark possibly, or probably I think, had animal skins to repel the water. So we have a floating platform, cages that would allow containment and ventilation of air, and then we would have animal skins on top of it, which would repel the water. A very workable model, and logically, probably what the ark looked like. Much different than we see in pictures, quite homely in appearance, but it just needed to be used for about a year to carry a bunch of animals, and then it was discarded.
The object they found on Mount Suleiman raised more questions than answers. 1 year later, Bob and a new group of climbers returned to the mountain. Authors Josh McDowell and Frank Turek were among the group visiting the site. Everyone was struck by the unusual wood-like nature of the object.
This is really interesting wood grain right here.
Even the partings on these timbers, you could see what appeared to be tool marks where what wood had been worked. But the color of the stain on the rock was a color that you see in many petrified formations.
These look like beams here. The grain is all going the same way, which I guess you'd expect with wood. Now, perhaps it's just the way the rock is. We won't know until we get it tested, but you can see the way the grain seems to all come the same way. Right down here, this ridge, and right behind me, the ridge ends and drops off sharply.
And I could see where someone a mile away, right over there, crossing that peak, would be looking over here in a snowstorm and make the assumption that this is an old boat, an old petrified wooden boat.
When you look at the edge pieces, it looks like it could have been wood. You know, it's striated in the same sort of fashion. It cuts somewhat like it, and the size of the whole structure approximates that of what we believe the ark was. I think this is exactly where Ed Davis was, and this may well have been what he saw and thought was the ark.
After reviewing all of the details of the site and the object itself, the group was convinced that they had found the Ed Davis site. But was this really Noah's Ark?
Some of the samples brought back, I looked at in September 2006 and verified that they are in fact petrified wood. In fact, some of the photo documentation suggests that some of the wood has been anthropogenically altered, man-made or shaped into beams.
Geologist John Anton has spent hundreds of hours over the past year evaluating rocks and petrified materials brought back from the mountain.
The best situation would be to find it in a pristine state. Everything, compartments, the whole works. You're not going to find that after all these years. I mean, it would be highly unlikely. And then if you got inside the ark, if there was anything left, there should be physical evidence maybe of human occupation and animal occupation. But in absence of all that, it's really a tough thing. You have to rely on the wood itself, that is preserved, that it has pitch on it, it's at elevated locations where you would not expect great forests to be. You would expect to see that the wood is handmade, hand-shaped, that sort of thing. Other than that, it would be a tough thing to prove no matter what. This is a microscopic slide of the petrified wood, and you can see very clearly the growth and that, in fact, it is a softwood variety.
Recently, other climbers have provided additional rock samples for study. The results from the testing of these materials may hold further clues to the mysterious object on Mount Suleiman.
There's something worth investigating. The body of evidence is definitely tantalizing.
The verdict really is still out. I sincerely suspect that there would not be any major pieces of wood left.
The sun was going down and the clouds were just right and the sun was shining on it was just incredibly beautiful mountains. And at points the sun was shining on this object and you're looking at it and it's like, that thing does not belong here. Something is just not right with that.
There are few absolute answers at this time. Research continues on samples brought back from Mount Suleiman. The mountains of Ararat are under ongoing scrutiny. However, for many on the most recent expedition, finding the Ark does not determine their degree of confidence in Scripture or impact their faith.
It's not just the search for an object, but hearing the stories and seeing people who believe in the Word of God, who believe in the Bible, who trust it as a life guide. That was worth it all to me.
I don't think there is any evidence we could find that would compel anyone to believe. I mean, there's enough evidence, I think, that God exists, and I think it's pretty compelling, like the creation of the universe out of nothing. But there's still a lot of atheists running around out there, primarily because it's not necessarily a head problem, it's a heart problem. People choose not to believe because they don't want to live by the implications of there being a God. They think if God exists, they're going to not be in control of their own lives anymore. They're not going to be able to do the things they're currently doing, hang out with the people they're currently hanging out with, whatever it is, they have reasons they don't want to believe in God. So even if we were to pull Noah's Ark down from some mountain in Iran down to the streets of New York City and show petrification and show maybe even some cages and some animal fur in there, that's not going to convince some people. Some people are going to say, no, I'm not going to believe anyway.
The mystery of Noah's Ark still revolves around having faith. The Scriptures say, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man comes.
And then the door in the ark was closed, and all those outside of the ark perished, and all those inside of the ark survived. It's a symbol of salvation. God saving Noah, who is a man of faith and a righteous man, and those outside the ark, they perished because of their unbelief.
And you know what I've concluded? The dice is still rolling. The verdict's not in. And whether we find the ark or not has nothing to do with the significance of my faith. I know why I believe in Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. I know why I trust the Bible is true, and especially that on the third day, Christ was raised from the dead. But you know, if this is the ark, and if it's not, it's somewhere, and someday it will be found. But whenever it is found, it'll just be kind of like the icing on the cake. It'll be that little extra that God gave to His people.
The finding of this object in Iran could cause more questions than give answers. We don't know what it is. It's fascinating what we found within the object, the animal hairs of various kind, the bird follicles, the savanna grasses, the seeds, the insects, everything shows us that it's just a very unique object in and of itself geologically. Can we prove it's Noah's Ark? We're a long way from proving ever that it's Noah's Ark. But it is one of the most fascinating finds that we've had, and I think it does prove that it is the Ed Davis object at the very least. So that in and of itself is good for me, because it ends a long, arduous, hard search. I've been trying to find the Ed Davis object. In the meanwhile, I was hoping to find Noah's Ark. What we found over there was fascinating, but I hope it just causes an interest in people, that it taps a wellspring of interest in people to search out the real ark in their lives, the real ark of salvation, which is Jesus Christ.
Last fall, my wife went in to see an orthopedic pain doctor because she had some knee problems. His name is Dr. No. His previous name, Noah. And so he wanted to talk about the trip. So we visited a little bit about it, and he said, well, let me tell you something. In September of '06, I was at a medical conference in Istanbul. And I took my dad with me because we wanted to see the sights and so forth. And when we got through, I asked for a tourist guide in Istanbul to take me to Mount Ararat. So he made the request of the tourist guide, and he said, why do you want to go? And Dr. No said, well, I want to go see where Noah's Ark is. And the guide said, well, it's not on Mount Ararat. Everyone in Turkey knows it's in Iran on Mount Solomon, where we were. Interesting.